I believe it was the summer before I started high school. My mom's cleaning company was short a maid or two. She figured it made more sense to make me work for my money rather than just hand over a bit every time I asked. Maybe she thought it would teach me the value of $1. I'm not sure. Whatever her motivations, I was hired to cover the phones. This was a test to see if I could handle the workload. I must have passed because I was moved over to cleaning once the school year began. 5 days a week after school and all day Saturdays, I followed her and the other girls around town cleaning people's homes and offices. This routine continued for 4 years of high school and college. At the end of it all, I had a business degree and a 50% piece in the company. Another 10 years would pass, and as Mom would step further away from the day-to-day running of the operations, I would take on more responsibility. Until one day when she handed me her keys and wished me good luck. The business became mine, and with it, all its headaches and heartaches. I never completely stopped going out on jobs. The work kept me fit and in good standing with my clients. If I told you I enjoyed the actual job, I'd definitely be lying. However, by the time I left high school, I'd become almost disconnected from it. After 20 years of cleaning toilets and kitchens, I figured I'd seen it all and nothing could ever get to me. That was until the call for the Pearson job. The man who called sounded like a kind and amiable old man, if not a bit spacey. It took a moment or two for him to get to his point, and it sounded like a run-of-the-mill house cleaning gig. What I saw when I arrived sticks with me to this day. I was met at the door by the old gentleman and led to a bedroom. The acrid scent coming from the room punched me in the gut and caused me to retch. While fighting the urge, I balked at the horrifying image before me. It appeared as if a tub full of blood had been splattered all about the room. The bed was by far the worst, soaked in an almost purple-tinted goo. One wall appeared to have a vast spray of blood and gray matter coating it. The horror of it overtook me, and I ran across the hall into a bathroom and barfed up my lunch. It took a few minutes to compose myself. I stormed from the bathroom and confronted the man about what I had just seen. He hung his head for a moment, at first mumbling an apology, then looking up toward me, quietly allowing a tear to fall from the corner of his eye. "I'm sorry, young lady. I know it's an awful sight. I should have warned you. But I was afraid you'd turn around and leave. My grandson..." He took a long, ragged breath and began again. "My grandson took his life this morning. He did it in that room. I can't even bear to go in there. I know it must be shocking, a shocking sight to see, but I didn't know who else to call. My insurance won't pay for it, and the other company I called, the one the police gave me the card for, they wanted far more than I could afford. I knew my wife had used your company many years ago, and I liked it. I guess I hoped you could help me." I wasn't sure what to say. I felt horrible for this poor man, but this type of work was way beyond my ability, not to mention my comfort level. Crime scene cleanup companies made more because they had to deal with bloodborne diseases and pathogens and had the proper chemicals to dispose of bodily fluids properly. We continued to stare at one another, unsure of what to say. His eyes were now filled with tears. It was obvious what I had to do. I asked the gentleman for the cleaner's card. I spoke to them a moment and hung up. Before I could get the words out, I began to get choked up myself. I cleared my throat and began once more. "It's all taken care of, sir. Your family's been a good client in the past, and it's the least I could do." At that moment, I didn't actually remember the family, but it seemed an easy way to explain what I was doing. Although right that second I wasn't sure why I was doing it. "You don't have to worry about it. Consider it a thank you for the loyalty to our company." The old man's eyes lit up when I said this. His face was now one big, wet mess. "I don't know how to thank you, young lady. I didn't think there were kind people like yourself around anymore." He lunged upon me and wrapped me in a massive arms. I did the same, and we stood there for the next minute, locked in our mournful embrace. In an instant, we released one another, and I bid him goodbye. I met my first serious boyfriend in my final year of college, and the first few months of our relationship were some of the happiest times of my life. Little did I know that our breakup the following year would result in him basically stalking me for 4 years afterwards. He made my life absolute torture for almost 5 times as long as we were actually a couple. And over time, someone I loved most in the world became someone I hated and feared with all my heart. A few months into our relationship, he started to display some increasingly possessive and controlling behavior. It was subtle at first. He'd asked if I'd done my workouts, then gently chide me if I'd been too busy to do them. He'd insist on knowing exactly what I was doing on any given day, and he repeatedly made comments on whatever I was eating, exclusively positive reinforcement, but that somehow made the whole thing even creepier. The fact that he was treating me more like a child or a pet than a girlfriend. I didn't just want to jump ship. I was really into him, and practically every young adult novel I'd read involving romance recommended honesty and communication. So, that's what I tried to do. Just warn him off that kind of controlling or patronizing behavior because it was super off-putting. At first, he seemed like he was completely incapable of taking any criticism regarding his behavior, which was yet another red flag. Yet when I assured him I'd be packing my bags if he didn't start treating me like an adult, he relented and promised to be better, but not without what was essentially a miniature temper tantrum. I just put it down to the shock of me threatening to leave. Like, it had upset me just to think about too, but still, if I'd have been as wise and world-weary as I am now, I'd have left him as soon as he began to beg. For about a month after, he was true to his word. He stopped being so possessive and let me live my life unhindered. Yet slowly but surely he started acting in the same old way, and that's when it became clear that it wasn't so much that he couldn't change, he just didn't want to. I knew the only way to proceed was to just be brave and break up with him so I could move on with my life. The breakup itself was pathetic in the extreme. He cried and screamed and begged to the point where I wondered where the man I fell in love with had disappeared to. It took a while, but in the end he accepted. A full week went by without us talking, and I honestly thought that was the end of it. But as it turned out, it was only the beginning. At first, when we got back in contact, his behavior and demeanor seemed like nothing more than the regular pining of a spurned lover. He'd tell me he missed me, get angry when I didn't reply and send a wall of abusive text, then follow up by sending gifts to my job, like embarrassing me in front of my coworkers was somehow going to suddenly win me over. I thought this might last for a week or two at most. If I just maintained my policy of no contact, then he'd eventually lose interest and move on. But he didn't. Every time his texts and calls died down long enough for me to start hoping, they'd start right back up again as frenetic as ever. It was a real pain to change my phone number, but in the end, I had no choice. For a while that brought a measure of peace, but instead of giving up, my ex just upped his game. It started when I just so happened to bump into him at the Publix near my apartment. I put the first encounter down to chance, but he didn't make a scene or anything. We just exchanged looks and moved on. But then I started bumping into him on the way home from work too, and whenever I took my dog for a walk, and whenever I went for a run, and I realized it was never just us bumping into one another. He was actually stalking me. Confronting him about it did nothing, and the restraining order I filed was rejected until I returned with photo evidence of us bumping into one another at a multitude of different locations. But even when I got it approved by a judge, he kept the minimum distance of 100 feet, just watching me from afar. He basically was saying to me, I could do anything I want. I'm right here, and you're right there. And when that message finally came through, I knew I had to just pack my life up and move across the city. I even managed to get a transfer to a different branch of the company I worked for. But still, he somehow managed to track me down. I repeated the entire process a couple of months later, only this time, I moved entire cities. Granted, the other city was only like 50 miles away, so I could easily visit friends and family on weekends, but it was still a big move. Honestly, though, I was willing to do whatever it took at that point to be rid of my ex, and that meant purging my online presence too. Yet somehow, he kept getting a hold of my number or my address. Like, it got to the point where I became intensely paranoid, getting it into my head that a close friend or family member was passing on my information, maybe for money, maybe out of fear for their safety. I actually threatened to sue the company that prints out state phone books, and they insisted that they delisted me, but still I kept getting calls from my ex. Towards the end of the 4th year, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I couldn't concentrate at work. I was a shadow of my former self, and it all crept up so slowly that I didn't realize how bad things had gotten until I fainted at work. I was offered long-term sick leave, but since the sick pay wouldn't be nearly enough to actually cover my expenses, I had no choice but to carry on with my life, even though I feared it might end at any moment as a result of my own poor health. Just then, 2 months shy of his stalking having lasted a full 5 years, a friend of mine forwarded me a news story involving misuse of resources at the National Tax Office. Staff members were using insider knowledge to find themselves and their immediate families enough tax loopholes to pay a trifling amount each year, which was obviously highly illegal. But one of the names listed in the story was one I was very, very familiar with. It was my ex, and although there was every chance he was committing the same tax fraud as the others, I knew he was abusing his position for another reason entirely. That's how, no matter how hard I tried to move on with my life, he was always able to get a hold of my updated contact details by looking up my freaking tax returns and other such paperwork. He and his coworkers were looking at lengthy prison sentences for what they'd done, and it seemed like finally I'd get the peace I'd been craving for so long. It might only be for a number of years until he could get out and find me again, but at least it would provide some measure of relief. Little did I know that this peace would turn out to be permanent, as my ex obviously couldn't face the time. He took his own life before his sentencing hearing. I'm not ashamed to say that I wept with utter relief once I heard the news. I know that sounds cruel, but you have to put yourself in my shoes. That man made my life the worst it's ever been for the longest time it's ever been that way. He made any kind of romantic relationship impossible, and those were the best dating years of my life, just burned away because he couldn't handle seeing me with anyone else. He wasn't sad at the losses he'd caused me, so I won't be sad about the losses he'd caused himself. It was throughout his own pathological stubborn and possessiveness that he came to find himself in such a situation. And if you ask me, he got everything he deserved. Everything. I had been helping deliver newspapers since my dad started as a carrier when I was 6. Eventually, my dad was given his own distribution center, so when I turned 16 and got my license, I started doing them on my own. Most of the people in the depot have been there for years. They've watched me grow up, and I consider many of them an extended part of my family. We spent every holiday together. The newspaper never had a day off. Countless birthdays. But there was one guy who always gave me the major creeps. I was about 14 when he started, I think. I used to hang out in the back office with some of my other friends as the years went on, and he always hung out back there because he was also friends with these people. At least that's what I thought. One of them recently told me they only tolerated him. I never spoke to him because something just felt really off about the guy, but nothing happened until last year. I moved home following my graduation from college. I was already having a hard time readjusting because I no longer had any friends in the area and I was missing my college town. Creepy guy that I'll just call B started hanging around me a lot. He had a weird man crush on my dad too, always buying him extra gifts for birthdays and holidays, sucking up majorly. I did my usual nice greeting, keep to myself stuff. But then he started buying me gifts for no reason. My mom told me to just keep them because it was all stuff I liked, Marvel and cat-themed things. That was probably my first mistake. He started acting like we were BFFs and coming out to find me while I was sitting in my car and talking about how I deserve so much more than being trapped here at the depot, and that he will do whatever it takes to get me out of here because he really cared about me and I deserve so much more. I never really acknowledged it because I thought it was really weird, and I thought if I just kind of nodded quickly he'd go away. This went on for weeks. Then he started texting me, telling me to sleep well after work and just being generally really creepy. I should probably mention I was 22 at the time, and this guy is well into his 40s. I started avoiding him, and he kept leaving things on my bench. I came in one day, and there were cat posters taped along the back of my bench. I kept taking them down, but they'd be back up the next day. When I started avoiding him, he made a Facebook group chat with me and my dad, complaining about every little thing and just being a major jerk. He made a really rude remark about my friend who was visiting from Germany, so I blocked him on Facebook because I wasn't going to deal with it anymore. B made a new Facebook and remade the group chat just to keep doing it. I went away for a while on a vacation to visit my childhood friend in Washington, and when I got back, he was calling me by my full name, which I absolutely hate. I was tired and jet lagged, so I went off on him, and he whipped around and blew up 3 times worse, telling me I was all these terrible names, and I thought I was so perfect because I was the boss's daughter, and there was no one there as perfect as him. My jet-lagged brain broke down after he walked away. I'm glad I held on till he left, but I stormed out to my car and told all my guy friends to keep him as far away from me as possible because I was so fed up. He started texting my brothers, asking if they were on his side and if they had his back over mine. My roommate, who was a guy, started getting threatening texts from him about wanting to fight over me. Everything was spiraling out of control. My dad made us sit down at the local Denny's one morning to work everything out because he was so sick of B blowing up his phone. When my dad was there, things were fine. B said he wasn't mad at me, but I was just the catalyst the day of the fight and whatever. My dad left to pay the bill, and suddenly B's attitude changed. I was in the wrong and treated him terribly, and all he ever did was love me, and I treated him so poorly. He kept trying to hold my hands over the table, telling me he loved me over and over. I put on a polite show because I just wanted this to end, and thought if I was nice about it, things would be different. Apparently my answer to everything is be nice and it'll go away. He walked me to my car after the conversation at Denny's and asked if I noticed anything different. I told him no, and he got agitated. Apparently he spent a lot of money on Captain America clothing, everything from a hat to shoes. I told him I didn't notice clothing like ever, and B got increasingly angry, telling me he did it to feel better about himself and impress me. Cap is my favorite superhero. I didn't even know he knew that. He had left the depot for a while, and when he asked to come back, I told my dad's manager I knew we were desperate, and I would be okay if I didn't have to talk to him. I wore headphones every day, my music full blast so I couldn't hear anything over them. He kept coming to my bench and would stand there waiting for me to acknowledge him, and he'd storm off angry when I didn't. He would glare at me if I ever talked to any other carrier, even though I'd been friends with many of them for years. My tipping point was something I found out after the fact. My guy roommate had gone to the grocery store late one Sunday. When he was walking to his car, he noticed some guy watching him. The guy watched him as he loaded the car and smoked a cigarette, and that's when my roommate realized it was B. My roommate got in his car and started driving home, and he noticed B was following him. He tried taking several wrong turns, and every time B followed. My roommate called his friend and said he was coming over, and when he said so, to open the garage to make it look like he lived there. When my roommate met his friend in the house, he told him everything, and they watched him drive by the house 8 times before leaving. No one called the police. I feel like that was the only thing that justified calling the police, because the harassment and stuff couldn't justify police action. I knew that from years of watching crime shows, and I was angry when I found out that no one called. I told my dad I wanted him gone. I couldn't take it anymore. Texts are easy to avoid, but now he was stalking us to try and figure out where I lived, since I wasn't living at home but renting a house with my brother and our friend. I spent months watching over my shoulder whenever I went to the store, worried he'd follow me home. After, he started going to my parents' house a lot because he knew where they lived, like he was waiting for me to be there one day. No one was taking this seriously. The gifts continued, and my mom kept telling me it was free stuff and to just keep it. But the gifts always came after something bad, and it was feeling oddly like an abusive relationship. Oh no, you're angry? Here's a gift to make you forget and like me again. My mom felt that way till her birthday, and a giant bouquet of roses and a teddy bear appeared at her job from B. We didn't even know he knew where she worked. After that, he started cornering me in the parking lot. I told him he'd been told to stay away from me, and I'd appreciate it if he listened. "Look," he said, "I'm sorry I took you for granted. I never should have done that. Are we okay now?" I was floored. I told him if he thought that's why I was avoiding him, he was more insane than I thought. After that, he was done at the depot, and I didn't see him for a while. A couple times I definitely saw him driving around on my route, but I couldn't prove it to a cop if I called it in. The last time I saw him, I was at my second job. I worked in a music store at a local mall. I was messing around with my coworkers when I turned around and saw him watching me from our hip-hop section. My stomach dropped. I almost collapsed and I started panicking. I ran him back and told my coworkers. They agreed if he asked they didn't know who I was and I could stay in the back till he left. I was a manager, but I didn't think I could actually kick him out because he was just watching me. My coworkers said he was there for almost 2 hours just wandering around. Never bought anything. It was like he was trying to wait me out, figuring I had to go back out front eventually. He texts my dad now and then trying to get his job back and fix things. My mom told him if he ever came near us again, she'd call the cops. When my dad wouldn't take him back, he started showing up at my uncle's depot and then started a group chat with him and my dad, saying they needed to sit down and talk. I was with my dad when my uncle called him about it. My dad called everything a misunderstanding. I said I didn't classify stalking as a misunderstanding. That day he came to my other job, I decided I was moving back to my college town 3 hours away. Home no longer felt like home. I didn't feel safe going anywhere. I still worry one day he's just going to show up in my new city. I transferred to the music store there. I had worked with these people my senior year of college, and they have looked out for me even after I moved. They all know the story, and I know they would all fight for me if it came down to it, so I feel safe, but I still panic when we walk to our cars after dark and have to check the parking lot to make sure he isn't there. It's been almost a year, and all I can say is I hope I never see him again.